This is Comic Geek Speak, episode 1773, a conversation with Zack Kruse.
You got it on Wednesday, and you was psyched about it, going to the volume up. These guys will talk about it, everything that geeks love. From cakes to laser beams, opinions like the seasons on everything you read. And comics, movies, games, toys, artists, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek. Uniting the world's mightiest heroes. This is...
I'm Ian Levinstein.
I'm Shane Kelly.
I'm Adam Burdo.
And I'm Chris Everly.
Comic Geek Speak.
I think I'm just going to let it ride out from now on. No more trying to skip. Just let the song play. Let the river run. Okay. And welcome everyone to the show. And boy, oh boy, do we have a good one for you.
Yeah, amen.
We just got to have a longtime friend of the show, Mr. Zack Kruse, on to discuss his upcoming book, Mysterious Travelers, Steve Ditko and the Search for a New Liberal Identity. And it was such a good conversation and such a well, back and forth wind that we had that it had to be its own episode.
Yep, we just usually did a field promotion from segment to episode.
Yeah. It was really something to listen to.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And my favorite episodes, and especially when we have other people on, are the ones where you could basically just sit back and let it go. And that's 100% what Zach gave us here with the wealth of knowledge he has on the subject. It's amazing.
Not only that, what's refreshing is how he's approaching Ditko from a perspective many people haven't considered. So it makes it all the more interesting, and it makes his book all the more enticing. So I can't wait to read it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as someone, who's only really familiar with, some of his Spider-Man stuff and some of his Doctor Strange stuff, I need to know more myself, and this is going to do just that. Well, I guess without further ado, we'll just go ahead and lead right into the conversation. It's always so awkward when I have to introduce myself.
You do it with panache, sir. You do it with panache.
Allow me to introduce myself.
Allow myself to...
That's it. Allow myself to introduce myself.
What is that from?
Austin Powers.
Oh, that is from Austin Powers. God, it was so familiar.
What do you do, Mr. Number 2?
All right. Take it away, us. And what I've affectionately titled for the show as Old Homes Week, even though it's been a lot of weeks at this point, continues as we reintroduce Mr. Zack Kruse to the Comic Geek Speak crowd. Zach, how you doing?
Oh, I am living the dream, brother. Can you believe that? Was that convincing?
Close enough.
Moderately so.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good.
I mean, you partially are, because one of the reasons that you're on this episode is you've got a new book coming out, and it's all about the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Steve Ditko.
Yeah, that's true. I wrote a book about Steve Ditko, and it comes out in February from the University Press of Mississippi. It's called Mysterious Travelers. And it takes a look at Ditko's career from 1953, which is when he starts, to 1986. And there's a few later things that I sprinkle in there as well, but mostly 1953 to 1986 because that's when Watchmen comes out. And I'm really interested in his philosophy and his politics, or if not so much him talking directly about politics, the way that his philosophy is reflective of a certain kind of politics and sort of the changing face of American liberalism and American culture. So, as it turns out, he's doing throughout his career, he was doing something really important that reflected massive changes in the way that we do business, I guess, as it were. So.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, if anybody exuded that, it was Mr. Ditko.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's true. And that's just, I mean, that was kind of the way that he lived his life, right? I mean, I think one of the things gets really lost when we talk about Ditko is that, and I know other people have said this before, so this is not a fresh thing, but when he's writing and plotting comics, from the 50s on up through the 60s and 70s, no one is really writing comics in the way that he is, or for the audience that he seems to have in mind. That's really different than his peers. And that's not to say that his peers are doing work that I think is intellectually inferior. Absolutely. That's not the case at all. In fact, many of them are doing really wonderful, brilliant work, really profound stuff. But Ditko's approach is wildly different from the standard, standard comic book fare that's being churned out. And, people like Denny O'Neil make a special point of saying that, when he started writing the comics that Denny O'Neil thought he was writing, he didn't think he was writing for the same audience as Ditko was. I think that changed. It certainly changes throughout the 70s and into the 80s. But when he starts doing that, nobody else is taking on the kinds of ideas and perspectives that he is.
Well, when I first heard about this book, I could literally hear Chris's ears like perking up at just the general idea of this book. So I'm sure.
Good.
I'm really excited to read it. And Zach, I wanted to start with a question because I read the ad copy.
Sure.
And I was intrigued by a phrase in it because I usually don't associate this word with Steve Ditko at all. Use the phrase mystic liberalism. Could you elaborate on what you mean by that, please?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, a lot of things. But so I guess one thing that I think we have to step back on is the word liberalism, because I think I'm confident in the way that we talk about it very regularly in sort of American discourse. When we say liberalism, we tend to mean the left. And that's a relatively recent development.
That's true. I agree with that. Yeah.
So when I'm talking about liberalism, or when we're talking about liberalism from a sort of political philosophic standpoint, what we're really talking about are the ideas that are sort of indebted to the Enlightenment, and then later on with John Stuart Mill and Alexis de Tocqueville and on down the line. So liberalism has a very different history and a different political philosophic meaning than I think it's normally deployed in the way that we might be talking to one another. So for example, when we talk about the notion of capitalism, right? Capitalism has always been inextricably linked to the notion of liberalism. And that's always been the case. And in fact, if you read, and I'm not suggesting that you do, but if you read a lot of libertarian writers, then they also, count themselves as liberals because in a certain way, I mean, their intellectual debts, whatever anybody thinks of those, are rooted in the kind of thinking that is found in liberal philosophy of the 18th and 19th centuries. So that's what I mean by liberalism. I'm using it in that particular context.
Well, I'm sorry. Continue, please.
Oh, no. Go right ahead.
No, I was going to say, I mean, that makes perfect sense as you elaborate upon it. And it's interesting because you mentioned capitalism and I'm sure you're more of an authority than I am, but all the reading I've done of Ditko, it seems he's very much fixated on the notion of ownership of his work and of being able to control and gain profit from his work. And when we think about the notions of capitalism and Ditko, that's always where I go to. What's your take on that?
Sure. Well, yeah. Yes. That's just, I mean, you got it, right? He believes that he should, profit from his work. I don't think that, regardless of where I differ from Ditko politically in a lot of ways, or philosophically in a lot of ways, I don't think his sort of demand isn't the right word, but his fixation on that sort of day's work for a day's pay, I don't think that that's entirely unreasonable, but more importantly, it's not at all out of step with the kind of liberal and libertarian thought that he's really indebted to and invested in. So when you tie those things together, I think that you're right. I want to jump back to this because I think it ties into a lot of the ways in which we talk about liberalism and capitalism in the 21st century. Is that the mystic part of this is not in any way to suggest that I think that Ditko is religious. In fact, he was avowedly atheist, and he was not a fan of religious mysticism of any kind. That being said, when he is writing and developing his stories and thinking through the ways in which his characters sort of navigate the fictional worlds that he creates for them, something else is happening in the background in American culture, and that is a resurgence and an investment in new thought and the power of positive thinking and how to win friends and influence people. So Dale Carnegie and Norman Vincent Peale, they become really huge sort of influential writers and thinkers in American discourse, especially as it relates to capitalism and business and all of those things, and sort of the ways that capitalism is changing in the 20th century after World War II. So when I say mystic liberalism, what I'm talking about is this sort of convergence of liberal capitalism and New Thought mysticism that happens in a very distinct way in the 20th century, particularly right after World War II, because up to World War II, much of New Thought and that kind of mysticism was indebted to socialism and the actual left and progressive ideals. So, but after World War II, once Peale and Carnegie get a hold of it, then things start to really change really radically. So, and then because Ditko is sort of working against that backdrop and then reading people who are also really invested in those ideas, whether they be sort of proto-libertarians or Nathaniel Branden, who was Ayn Rand's lover and then excommunique, or Ayn Rand herself, all of those things get sort of wrapped up into this thing that I'm calling mystic liberalism. It's the notion that you can create profit and capital for yourself, and you can not only create profit and capital for yourself, but you can create your literal self by sort of this deep exploration inside of your own mind and deciding who you are and who you're going to be in that moment. And the rest of the world be damned, you're going to create yourself in this moment. And by creating yourself, you can also create wealth in the circumstances that beget wealth. So that's really where I'm going with this. And I think that that's really evident in a lot of Ditko's work as he sort of sculpts and sort of molds and plays with these ideas over time.
Man, I want to read your book even more now. That was a fantastic bit of advertising there, man.
Good.
I was just going to say, like, I mean, especially when it comes to mysticism, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is, you know, his work on Doctor Strange.
Sure.
And just how much of the wonders of the universe and the mind, you know, plays so heavily into that. And, you know, that's still technically, you know, some of his earliest works. And just where he went from there was so greater and bigger than you know, even that. So it's just fascinating where, you know, you see, like, you know, where he began and where he wound up very much tied together.
Right. Yeah. And I think Doctor Strange is really an ideal example of what he's thinking through philosophically, right? Mm-hmm. Like, he's not really getting into sort of the political stuff or the stuff with capitalism or anything like that. In fact, he doesn't really write too much about actual capitalism other than when he's talking about labor. But with Doctor Strange, I mean, that is sort of the sort of mystic liberalism sort of par excellence, right? I mean, Doctor Strange is a psychotherapist in the first story, right? He goes into the dreams of his first client and forces the client to confront the negative things inside of him and the bad stuff that he's done. I mean, that's where nightmare comes from, right? And, you know, hijinks ensue, as it were. But I mean, that's really what's being advocated for in this sort of set of the sort of unit of philosophic ideas, right? That you have to go inside of yourself, find whatever ghosts are haunting sort of the deep recesses of your mind, and then try to bust those ghosts or not try to bust them. And the choices that you make ultimately determine who you are. So Doctor Strange, even though he's going into sort of ostensible universes, right, they're always pocket dimensions. He's never going out into space. He's always going into a sort of interest space. He's always climbing into something, right? Or like when he goes into the dark dimension, as an example, towards sort of the peak of Ditko's run on Doctor Strange, he goes in literally inside of a portal that's inside the Eye of Agamotto, right? That's how he gets to, the dimension, the world that contains eternity is through the eyes, into the eye.
Right.
So he's always interested in that sort of internality of Doctor Strange. And Doctor Strange, for what it's worth, as he's sort of developing as a character over time, he's always moving inward and then fighting the things that sort of are avatars for different sort of parts of the consciousness, right? So take, for example, Clea, before she's named. When he meets Clea works as sort of this avatar for doubt. Clea is full of doubts, but she's not a bad person, but she has not great ideas that are motivated by doubt. And Doctor Strange has to not defeat her, but sort of contend with her and decide what to do about these doubts. He has to listen, and Clea ultimately has to stay inside of the dark dimension because she is that sort of function of doubt that sort of keeps him in check. But he has to sort of move past those doubts in order to face Dormammu and then eventually meet Eternity, right? And when he meets Dormammu is anti-reason, right? Dormammu is obsessed with force and control and dominating others. Doctor Strange is trying to sort of keep those urges in check. And Dormammu is we know this, or we can sort of suss this out symbolically, because Dormammu's head is a fireball. He doesn't have a head in the way that Ditko draws him. He's just a ball of flames. He's raw emotion motivated by sort of power lust. And then things like the mindless ones too. I mean, again, those are the unchecked emotions and mob mentality that all of us, Ditko thinks, have to sort of deal with on a regular basis and sort of keep in check, right? So yeah, Doctor Strange is a great example of that, because he's everything that he does is invested in those sorts of challenges and trying to sort of create yourself to become the master, right? To become a master of your own identity and place in the world.
You mentioned mob mentality. I remember you mentioned Denny O'Neil earlier. I remember there was an interesting anecdote I read in an interview with Denny O'Neil where he said, this is in the early 60s in the Marvel office, and he said Ditko made a very disparaging comment about, I think, civil rights protesters. And O'Neil was incensed because I think he was actually involved in the protest that he was criticizing. Do you think that's in line with kind of the way he viewed, sort of the herd or gatherings like that? Yeah.
And I'm not familiar with that precise thing that O'Neil is reporting back on. And if I've heard it, just being honest, I don't remember what it was. So I'd have to look it up to sort of give my best possible answer.
We could do another example. There was in a Spider-Man issue, I forgot the number, where he has Spidey like waving his fist at like protesters below.
Right. Yeah. Right. No, I understand where you're going. I'm just saying about as it relates specifically to civil rights. Yeah. I don't want to comment on that because I'm not familiar enough with that exact situation. But as it relates to protesters and sort of mob mentality and that sort of thing, yeah, he's really opposed to that stuff. But it's not because I mean, he is, he's a very early 20th century libertarian, and he wrote for Reason magazine. I mean, he produced comics for Reason magazine in their early days. So it's not that. It's less about the ideals in most cases and more about sort of being a joiner and being a part of a herd and not thinking for yourself and taking all of the things that make you a person, an individual person, and casting them aside in favor of something else, right? Some sort of currency that you get from being a part of a group. But he's really wildly opposed to that. And you see that artistically throughout a lot of his work. I mean, not just with the mindless ones, but as you say, there are instances in other comics. A really good one is in Blue Beetle, when Blue Beetle is fighting this just lump of clay called the Destroyer of Heroes, which is a statue that the statue maker is wearing as a costume and then doing crimes. It's a delightful story. He has no heart. It's literally cut out of him. But Ditko is dealing with those same sort of unwashed masses. I mean, just frankly, just dirty hippies, right? None of whom wear shoes. They all have tattered clothes and tattered pants and all that sort of thing. I mean, to him, it's a sign of, in certain ways, I read that as him seeing it as a sign of a lack of self-respect that those participants have, because they're not willing to do things on their own, but they're willing to shout at other people and shout them down. So, again, my feelings about that, like where I would be in that conversation, are not in the same places where Steve is. But that's really baked into all of that, though. His concern about the masses, his concern about sort of the lack or the loss or the submission or the elimination of a self, of a personal sort of identity. That's really tough for him. He does not care for that at all.
Well, Zach, what's so exciting about your book, based on what you're saying here, is that it sounds like you're really going to explore beneath, like there's stereotypes about Steve Ditko, right?
Yeah.
That you read in a lot of different periodicals and histories and so forth. And like any stereotype, there's some truth there, but they kind of just scratch the surface. So I'm really excited to read your book because it looks like you're going really into depth about what apparently, as far as we can tell, made this very interesting and eccentric man tick.
Yeah. And there's a lot of just, lies is too strong of a word, but there's a lot of bad information out there about Ditko that gets spread around. Some of it is like when people say he's an objectivist. No, he's not. He liked Ayn Rand. He was never an objectivist, and went out of his way to say as much. But there's other things too, like nobody knows why he quit Marvel. Yeah, we do. We know exactly why he quit Marvel. Or he and Stan got in a fight because Stan wanted Norman Osborn to be the Green Goblin, and Ditko didn't like it. That's nonsense. That was Ditko's idea. So, I mean, there's just lots and lots of bad information out there. And not the least of which, too, is like he's a recluse. Well, what do you mean by recluse, right? Do you mean someone who's really a recluse, like who goes inside and doesn't talk to anyone ever? Or do you mean someone who just doesn't want to talk to you personally? Or do you mean someone who just who protects themselves against sort of the demands and the lack of privacy that is offered by the fan press, right? I mean, it's complicated. He's a very complicated person, but
I've always found it hard to be a recluse when you're living in the middle of Manhattan.
Right.
If he really wanted to be like a hermit or a recluse, he would have retired to like, a mountainous, region, like somewhere in the middle of America where no one could find him, in like a little cabin with just himself and a typewriter, and that's not what he did. He was literally in Manhattan. So that's, I think that says a lot about, the myth and the reality there.
Yeah, his office was in Times Square.
Yeah.
For people that are familiar with Manhattan, in Times Square, there's that restaurant, that Stardust Diner. It's the 1450 building, right?
Yeah.
That's where like Martin and Lewis were in there for a long time. Mm-hmm. That was his building.
Oh, wow. Oh, my God.
So he's there in the thick of all of this stuff, right? And he spent, and we know for certain he spent, an immeasurable amount of time writing letters to fans about the dumbest stuff. and not that he's dumb, but like like any comic book creator, he just gets the dumbest questions, right? But he would take the time to respond to as many as he felt was appropriate and necessary, right? That doesn't sound like someone who's hiding. He's in the phone book. Are you hiding? Are you really a recluse, or do you just not want to talk to Wizard Magazine? So it's tough, because so many of those ideas are just sort of deeply ingrained into the way that we talk about them. Like, I don't know if you guys saw it. I guess it was maybe 10 years ago now.
In Search of Steve Ditko?
Yeah, was that 12 years ago? That's a long time ago. But and I don't have anything bad to say about Jonathan Ross or his desire to put that documentary together. But even in that documentary, Neil Gaiman gets on there and just says the most astoundingly just wrong things, right? and again, not because Neil Gaiman's a dummy. He's not. He's brilliant. He's a great writer and I'm sure a very fine person. But he's repeating the same stories that we've all been told, but nobody bothered to fact check.
Yeah.
Well, let me play devil's advocate for a minute here, though. Is it hard to fact check because Ditko wasn't speaking to people who wanted to fact check things?
So that is another interesting and good criticism. So on one hand, I have to say, no, it's not unreasonable to sort of see how those things, those myths get built up, right? Because he wasn't talking to major fan press outlets any longer. He used to talk to fanzines in the 60s and then stopped doing that. But so in one sense, I get that, right? In another sense, though, and this is where it gets tricky, is that he did answer all of these questions in a number of self-published comics that were available through Diamond for a long period of time until, things, the sands shifted there for reasons that I don't know. And also through Robin Snyder, his publisher, through a newsletter called The Comics, where he wrote prolifically about his time at Marvel, and probably, not counting interviews, but he probably wrote more than anyone about the labor, the working conditions of the Marvel offices in the 1960s. But the problem is that they were published in a fanzine, in a newsletter, Robin Snyder's The Comics, which did not have anything that we would describe as a wide circulation, right? It was a mail order thing that if you knew about it, you knew about it, and if you didn't, you didn't.
Well, yeah, and because I've seen excerpts of some of those interviews some of those writings you're describing, for sure.
Sure, yeah, and lots of them are reprinted in later collections. Not all of them, but many of them are. So he's a pretty prolific writer. But as you say, or as I think you're suggesting, it's tough to expect the average reader to just know this stuff or just be able to find it, because you can't just find it, right?
No, it's true. Yeah.
You just can't. And I've been reading this stuff for ages, and there's a lot that I've certainly, as it comes to Snyder's The Comics, I've gathered as many as I can, but there's a great number of those that I just don't have, and where the content hasn't been reprinted yet. So, it's just. What
do you think about and I've talked about this in the past. And maybe I could have been wrong, so that's why I'm asking you. What do you think about sort of the stereotype when it comes to Ditko's later work, like The Question, Mr. A, that he had a very rigid sense of right and wrong and black and white? And was that as true as it's portrayed? Did that permeate his personal life as well?
Well, I can't speak to his personal life because I just don't know, and yeah. I think, and I wouldn't feel right about making those kinds of speculations without hard information in front of me. Right. But there's a book that won an Eisner Award, Doug Walk's, what was that called? Reading Comics. It's on my shelf over here somewhere. Anyway, where that, it is Reading Comics, where claims like that are made, that everything that he produced after he left Marvel were just hectoring objectivist tracks, as one commentator put it. That's simply not true. It's just not. And that doesn't hold up under any significant amount of scrutiny, I think. Other people who read his work differently might have a different take on that. I don't think that holds up at all. And I don't think that holds up for a few reasons. The first of which is that the ideas that are expressed in Mr. A and The Question are ideas that Ditko had been playing with from jump. From 1953 onward, he's messing with these ideas. But by the time we get to the mid-'60s and he's quit Marvel because Stan stopped talking to him, then by that time he's read Rand. He may have went to the Nathaniel Branden Institute in New York. I don't know that for certain. There are claims that he did, but we don't know for certain. He's had those ideas, and then he takes those ideas that he's hearing or reading from Rand or from Brandon or from the Objectivist newsletter or from Reason magazine or from conversations with other sort of like-minded libertarian people sort of in that milieu. Or maybe he saw the Gary Cooper, King Vidor Fountainhead movie or whatever, and then he layers those things on top of the ideas that he already had, and because they're the top layer and the most sort of and the layer that is most readily available to the average reader, assumptions get made that, oh, this is who he is. Well, not so much, right? These are characters who are playing with these ideas. So there's that element of it. There's three parts to this. The second part to this is that after that point, after he creates The Question and Mr. A, basically in the same moment, he still goes on to do lots of other stuff, right? That is exploring the same ideas, but in much more complicated and well, maybe not even more complicated, but in very different ways, right? So like the Hawk and Dove, the Creeper, Shade the Changing Man, Static, the Mocker, everything that he does after this are still playing in the sort of same sandbox of ideas. His H&J stories, all the way up to the day that he died, they're still sort of working through these same things. Mm-hmm. So there's that part of it too. It's always been a part of his sort of artistic, philosophic identity. The third part is I don't think, and this is where I think that someone might sort of roll their eyes at me or their eyes make it a little wide. I don't think the question in Mr. A, I don't think they're real. I mean, they exist so far as they are characters on a page, right? But I don't think they're designed to be read as characters who literally inhabit a space in the same way that, say, Peter Parker literally inhabits Queens and New York, mm-hmm. right, in Manhattan. I think the question in Mr. A are ideas, and they are avatars for this sort of idealized person who has done all of the work, performed the sort of ghost-busting acts, right? Like expelled all of sort of the doubts and hang-ups and dark thoughts from their mind, and is this sort of singular sort of ideal. And because of that, they exist very differently in those stories. So, and they're less important insofar as what they do is less important than how other characters in the stories respond to them, right? So, like you might read Mysterious Suspense, right? That question one-shot, or what ended up being a one-shot, and look at the way that all the other characters respond to Vic Sage, right? They sweat when he comes around. They're nervous. They're terrified. They have those classic sort of Ditko wide-eyed, gaunt features, right? Just as Vic Sage walks by them. Rex Grain and Mr. A have a similar effect on the people that they encounter as well, right? The question's name is the question, right? He is literally the question that you have to ask yourself in terms of like how you stack up as a human being, right? As a living person. That's what he is. He is the question. Mr. A operates in a really similar vein, right? So when Mr. A does things, like things like the right to kill, that Ditko sort of first deploys with the question, but then really sort of codifies in the actions of Mr. A and sort of the black and white card, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think that he's talking about actual murder, right? Like Steve Ditko, I'm 100% confident, did not believe in vigilante justice, right? He didn't believe that if you see a crime being committed or if you see a purse snatcher, that you, the citizen, should execute that purse snatcher, or that purse snatcher should even be executed, right? I don't think he thinks that at all. I'm really certain of that. But what I do think is that he sees the right to kill as an intellectual exercise, right? Where, again, like I've been saying throughout, you, the person, have to make a choice between the good and the bad. Somewhere, you, as that person, you are on a continuum between those two things, right? And there are letters where Ditko has written to fans where he talks about sort of existing on a continuum between these extremes. Because you are on that continuum, you have to make a choice. And the right to kill, for you, that choice maker, is the right for you to eliminate the bad thoughts from your life, from your mind, from your actions or deeds, right? So one way that this happens is in a story that was published in the early 80s called My Brother. My Brother is a disturbing story if you only read it at the surface level. So if you read My Brother at the surface level, it is about two, they're not called twins, but they are illustrated as identical twin brothers. Mm-hmm. One of whom is very good, and he becomes a criminal defense attorney and helps and goes out of his way to sort of help his community and help people who've been wrongly accused of crimes and get them out of jail. Again, that's sort of telling about Ditko's politics too. Like maybe he's not the right wing, lunatic people, slander him as. So his brother, on the other hand, Ben, is a mob enforcer, right? He's a bad dude, and he decides that he's going to kill his brother, and that's the way that he's going to feel good about himself, and he's going to get justice in the world, right? The two have a confrontation at the end of the story where they meet up in an alley, and Ray, the good brother, tells Ben that he that he should kill the bad person. He should, commit this act. He should destroy the evil. He should destroy this thing that hurts him and vexes him so much. And then Ben turns the gun on himself and kills himself. It's the final scene. He blows his brains out and he drops dead in an alley. And then Ray, the good brother, just walks away. Right. So if you read that level, if you read that story at the surface level, that is a dark story. Yeah. Right. That is really bleak. But on the other, and it also reads, understandably, as pretty reactionary. On the other hand, if you read that in the context of a 35 to that point, 30 plus 30, almost 35, almost 40-year career. At that point, if you read it in that context, it's a little bit different, right? If you read it in the context of sort of a philosophic allegory, then it's a lot of it different. And what happens is the play between the two is this is one person, right? Ben and Ray are the same person. They are occupying the same sort of internal space. The space of this city is the mind. It is the idioscape. It is wherever the consciousness exists. And here are the two sort of competing forces, right? The force of good that wants to sort of act as a redemptive force and get redemptive justice for people in the world, and the one that wants to destroy the world. And this mind as it exists, the city has to decide. And the choice is made, right? And Ben dies and Ray goes on. So a lot of times, like when we read these stories and there's like these stark consequences and this sort of really sort of bleak violence, it's important to sort of keep in mind that there's something else happening here, right? That's not just about, boy, he sure hates hippies. I mean, yeah, he does, but what do the hippies represent in this moment, right? Is it really about literal hippies and people that are just hanging out in Greenwich Village, or is it about something other? And to my reading, to my way of thinking, it's always about something else. There's always something much more profound happening in the background there.
Yeah, I think that the same thing that applies to actors applies to artists and creators and writers, that you always think you know exactly what a person is like based on their works, because that's all you know is the works. Yeah. When in reality, because you've never actually, broken bread with this individual, you don't really know what they're like outside of what they're creating. So, you get this mind's eye, you get this vision of what they are, but, they could have been a very, very different person than you ever knew, and only the people that were in their lives will actually ever know that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I think Ditko is very much that way. Yeah. Right? He's very much that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. Shane, Murd, you guys have anything you want to add in on the conversation?
No, it's just fascinating listening to you.
Oh, good.
It's a lot of stuff that I never knew or never would have known without you bringing it up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I it's nice to be listened to. I got like this I feel like I'm feeling this Mel Torme-esque Velvet Fog power sort of descending upon me. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, I've been reading this stuff for a long time and thinking really hard about it, and my hope is that by the end of this, like once the book comes out, it's certainly going to ruffle some feathers. I'm sure of that. I don't think there are good books that don't ruffle feathers. Yeah. So, and that's okay. I'm eager for that. I think there's going to be a lot of people who are stone cold objectivists that are going to be really upset with me, and that's okay. I'd welcome that.
Wait, you think they're going to be upset because you're not portraying Ditko as simply an objectivist? Is that what you're saying?
No, because there are some pretty specific and distinct challenges I make to objectivism.
I see
throughout the book where I think that they're going to be upset, and I don't mean them. The challenges that I make, and I'll leave them for the book, is not to dismiss it. I think the mistake with this kind of stuff is to just outright dismiss it and call it kooky. Whether that's true or not is entirely different from the impact that it's had on all of our lives. And the thing that I say all the time, it's that David Byrne line, my God, how did I get here? Right. So, and I don't think we can afford to be dismissive of those ideas, even if we think that they are the fringe things we ever heard.
Well, I couldn't agree more, because whether you agree that philosophy or not, its impact on the 20th century can't be overstated.
Yeah.
And especially when you think about Ayn Rand and where she came from and her fleeing the Bolshevik Revolution and all that. And
Sure.
I'm really looking forward to reading your book because and Ian had made a good point before, and I've fallen prey to this myself sometimes as a reader and as like a lover of comic history, is that I've read a lot about Ditko. I'm sure not as much as you have, Zach, and a lot of what I've read is a lot of this sort of surface scratching stereotypes. Now, to be fair to myself when saying that, on the other side of that is Ditko didn't speak that much to, sort of like the wider sort of comic press and media. So a lot of people are making like these like anecdotal evidence, or like when I told you the Denny O'Neil interview, right? I read that in like a Tomorrow's magazine. Like I believe Denny O'Neil. I mean, he was talking, so I'm sure it happened. But without the context, it's very difficult to get a handle. Like Ditko's like Quicksilver in a way, so ephemeral. Like trying to understand all about him, because admittedly, like what I've read about Ditko, and this is purely like gut reaction. I always think to myself, I don't know if I would have liked this guy. But see, that's just me reacting to tidbits you read and hear about over the years. And what I'm excited about is your book. It's clearly going to go into a lot more depth and detail. So,
yeah, well, I think that I think that you should be fair to yourself, and you should be generous to yourself in those instances. Because early on, when I first started working on this project, I guess I started really writing in earnest or thinking in earnest about 2014. I fell into some of those very same traps, right? I accepted whole cloth. I was like, oh, well, I'd done the reading on the objectives and stuff. I already knew that pretty well at that point, and or really well, I guess. And I just bought into it whole cloth, right? Like I just accepted it because that's what I had been told by other people, or I read in other places. And then you read something like Mr. A and or the questioning, like, oh, of course, right? Because as I said, it's right there. It's just this top layer that's so easy to sort of hang your hat on. And so yeah, I think we all sort of fall prey to those things, and we should all be generous to ourselves about it. We're all works in progress. It can be wrong. And but I think that you're right, though. I mean, because of those sort of myths and rumors and all that sort of slipperiness, that sort of Quicksilvery type nature you described. I think what often gets lost in that, and not just with Ditko, but this goes back to Ian's point too, it's not that like we lose sight of the facts, but we lose sight of the fact that, or the notion that this is a human person, right? This is a human being who has thoughts and emotions and responds and is complicated and views the world in a way peculiar to themselves based on their own experiences, right? And I think so much of that gets just we mangle that when not us in this group, but just we as people often mangle that when we start criticizing work or just accepting prefabricated ideas about someone. I think that's always a mistake. I'm guilty of that mistake all the time.
Yeah.
But as we all are. But I think that's one of the bits of perspective that I hope people take away from the book, is that he really is very complicated. And I think that honestly, like, he's one of the people, in spite of my concerns about the outcomes of the type of philosophy that his work reflects, right? I'm not saying that people flocked to Ditko in the 60s and changed their worldview, or that Ronald Reagan, was reading Ditko and then plucked ideas from this. Like, that's obviously not true. But I have a lot of concerns about the worldview that he's reflecting and what the consequences of that were. And I think that there's a lot of really troubling outcomes that have come from this. But also, this is a person who, even though he has these ideas that I can't get on board with, is complicated and really does seem to care very deeply about redemption and about finding your own way and finding yourself and trying to sort of break bread and communicate with those that might not share your worldview. I think if you read a comic like Static, which I love Static, there is a lot of that right there on the page. Like this negotiation about how to manage a relationship with someone who doesn't share your same either values or philosophic worldview, and not how to convert them, but how to be honest with them, right? And how to maintain a kindness and a friendship towards them. I think he's really interested in that. And I think he does that all the time. And I think that's also evidenced by all the time he spent writing letters to people who would ask him the most inane stuff. So I think that's really a big part of who I see him as.
Yeah.
That I think gets sort of lost. That I hope people pick up on throughout the book.
And you've also eloquently captured one of the great challenge we're facing now as a nation when it comes to our political culture and our political dialogue, because so much of what we see around us, it's certainly when the loudest voices, is you're not having that exchanging of ideas. You're not having that kind of discourse because everything appears to be so polarized.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And I think that, early, I mean, I absolutely would not speculate on where Ditko fell on a lot of our current stuff before he died.
Yeah.
But you can see very early on, like that, how invested he is in sort of the notion of discourse, right? And by all accounts, and I accept these accounts because they come from numerous firsthand sources, Wally Wood and Denny O'Neil, and those are just the two that come top of mind. But Larry Hama has talked about this, I guess. Who else am I thinking? Gil Kane has talked about this. They all say that one of the things that's really unifying about the way that they all talk about Ditko is Ditko loved the debate, right? Like he loved sort of the intellectual sort of exchange of ideas, and engaging people who clearly did not share his worldview, right? That seemed to be something that he really, I guess I would say reveled in, based on the accounts that Wood and O'Neill and Kane and others have given. And I think you see that in his work. You certainly see it in Hawk and Dove, right? Hank Hall is not the ideal in Hawk and Dove, right? And neither is Don.
Yeah.
But the fact that they both have to sort of coexist in order for the Hawk and Dove to work, right? In order for them to do anything, they have to sort of find a way to get together and sort of not compromise, but find common ground.
Zach, did you read, it was a recent issue of Alter Ego where they had a whole retrospective on Ditko?
Yeah.
I can't think of the number of it. I'm looking through my magazines right now. But there was a fascinating one of the interviews was a guy who was a kid and kind of spent some time with him, and they went to his studio when he was an adult, and they actually have a picture of Ditko. This is not long before he died.
Bernie, is it the Bernie Bubness thing?
I think so.
Alter Ego 160, by the way.
Yes.
Ian, that was so clutch. God, you're sexy. But I was really struck by, because there's so, one of the great stereotypes about Steve Ditko is there's virtually no photographs of him, right? Like there's a famous one of him in the studio with the words, the sign saying "Think" in the '60s, and everybody's seen that picture. But to see him as a very old man outside his apartment door, that image just struck me.
Yeah,
immensely.
Yeah, and that's not his apartment though; that's his office. So that's.
I'm sorry, studio. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's okay. But just for sake of clarity, I really liked that Bubness piece. I thought that was a pretty good issue of Alter Ego too. I enjoyed that immensely.
As did I.
But yeah, the photograph thing. Publicly available photographs versus actual photographs are not the same thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Or things like not wanting to be filmed, right? Like there's a big difference between someone that and says, "Hey, can I record this?" and someone that ambushes you with a video camera and crams a phone in your face, So yeah, and those photos certainly exist. And I've of late, because very much because of the book, thanks to the book, I've become friendly with Mark Ditko, his nephew.
Oh, nice.
And Mark, for a while, was sharing lots of family photos that featured Steve. Right? They just weren't, publicly available.
Right. Yeah.
Because those studio shots with him and Eric Stanton in their studio, those are publicity stills for them. That Ditko chose not to have another one is okay. So yeah, and I know that Ian knows this, but I got to meet Steve before he died.
Yep.
I I was in Manhattan. I was doing research for this project, and I went and I knocked on his door, and he answered, and he was really sweet. You know, he was not happy to see me at first, because I was, you know, I mean, and rightfully so. I mean, I was the asshole in that situation. I was absolutely the asshole because I just show up unannounced and knocking on this.
So what did you say when did you say to him when he opened the door?
I introduced myself. I suspected that he might have a vague notion of who I was from my days at DCBS. When I was working there, I set up all the stuff to sell his books through DCBS and sold a lot of Ditko comics through that store. And then he and I had also exchanged a couple of letters up to that point too.
Okay.
So I introduced myself, and there's a story that I include in the preface to the book, but I've said it elsewhere, so I'm not spoiling anything, I guess. But I knocked on the door, and I introduced myself, and I said, I recognize that I'm intruding on your time and your space, but if I didn't come here, I knew that I would regret this, and I came here to tell you that your work literally changed my life, and it did. And he goes, and this is one of my favorite memories of anything. It's like it's getting married, the birth of my children, and in this moment, he looks at me dead. He looks at me dead in the eyes, and he goes, "Yeah, well, all lives change." and I go, you know what? You're absolutely right, but your work, right, and emphasizing the work, is like your work, what you put down on the page, that made a difference for me. You changed me, and then after that. He acquiesced, and he was much looser, and we had a very brief, very pleasant exchange, and he was really kind with his time. And when it was clear that it was time for me to go, I left, and I did, and it was something.
I was so happy for you when that happened, Zach. By the way, man, because I've been seeing you post about him for years and years and years, and just when that all coalesced and that all combined and everything worked out, and you made it to New York and you went there. It's like, okay, I'm really, really glad that you got to meet him before he passed.
Yeah, me too. It was really special experience. It was really beautiful.
Yeah.
And and the thing that I just whenever I've told the story, I think that the thing that I always try to emphasize is, first of all, that I was in the wrong for doing that to begin with, but more importantly is that he was really sweet and really kind, and just a good person, and so that was a huge thing.
That's awesome. That's
a great story.
Yeah. Yep. Well, man. I mean, I cannot wait for this book to come out. As someone like Shane said earlier, I mean, I'm nowhere near anywhere up to date on Ditko history or anything like that. I basically just know him from the works that I've read. But I 100% am looking forward to learning more, and I think your book's going to do just that.
Good. That makes me very happy. I hope lots of people do. And there's lots of different ways to get it, through Amazon or directly through the University Press of Mississippi. And then it will be in the previews catalog in December, I think. Maybe November, but December at the latest.
Well, great. We'll definitely be back to doing previews episodes at that point, and we will 100% be mentioning it again at that point.
Hooray. Hip-hop hooray. So one other thing that... Since I had heard from you, Ian, about this, one of the things that I feel like I have to say, since we're all here together, and especially since Murd's here, is that, like from the time that I was 14, I wanted to be called doctor. Like that became maniacally important to me. But I always wanted my degree. I always wanted to have a PhD in popular culture, right? Because that was what I loved and obsessed over. And you could do that at the time, but I had no idea.
Yep.
And even through my undergraduate degree, I was always writing about comics, but I had no notion that you could do the things that I'm doing now. And to a certain degree, you really couldn't. But anyway, so I have to tell you guys, though, in those early days of CGS, I remember hearing Jeff Clock was on the show.
Yep.
And, you know, it's like a Doc Comics type thing. And I was like, oh, you can do this. And it was like a light bulb moment, right? I didn't know how to do it, right? But I like that you could do it. And then did you guys have Pete Coogan on too? I can't remember. Okay. Yeah. It was just Jeff Clock.
I don't know about
it was
that
just,
one.
Yeah, it was just Jeff Clock.
And just as a quick addendum, turns out Zack Kruse was indeed right on Mr. Peter Coogan being on the show before. Wasn't an episode that Shane and Murd were on. It was actually just Brian Deemer and Mr. Pants Brian Chrisman himself. But it is Comic Geek Speak episode 457. Cover date, I'll just say that, of June 11th, 2008. Superhero fashion at the Met with Jeff Clock and Pete Coogan. That was back when the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City was having a big superhero fashion exhibit, which I actually went to myself back in the day. So just wanted to give the quick clarification on that one, that Pete Coogan was indeed on the show at least once, and this was that instance. So if you go back in the archives to Comic Geek Speak episode 457, which is readily available on the website, you can go ahead and check out Pete's contribution to the show.
Anyway, but then that, and then when Murd came around, and Adam, and you were talking about your MA and doing stuff with Crisis and all that sort of thing, I was like, oh, of course, this is exactly what I should have done. He did it already. And if somebody says I can't, then I can say, well, I heard about a guy, and take it from there. So anyway, you know, I've been around. I've been talking about Ditko and stuff for a long time with lots of people that we're all, you know, friends and friendly with. But I would be lying if I said that CGS was not like a huge part of that in the beginning, right? Like those are two like spark moments for me where I was like, oh, I can absolutely do this. I don't give a shit anymore. I'm going to find a way to do this, and then I did. So here, that's awesome. That's how we get here, right?
That's awesome.
Congratulations on that freshly minted PhD, Zach.
Oh yeah, it's been a long time coming, but you know, like I said, man, like hearing you do all that stuff. You went to Bowling Green, right?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, and
even though you got your degree from MSU, and I think there might even still be some lingering animosity between BGSU and MSU for MSU having become the beneficiary of the Journal of Popular Culture.
Oh yeah.
Even so, I forgive you.
No, I appreciate
Congratulations
that. But if it makes you feel any better, though, that MSU being the beneficiaries because of the guy who was the director for my dissertation, which is who was Gary Hoppenstand. And Gary was a student of Ray Brown's and got his PhD at Bowling Green. So, so you know, whatever animosity exists there, it was cultured, it was cared for, it was curated and cared for by someone who really cared about that and was good friends with Ray. And then I was the managing editor for that journal for a while because MSU was the beneficiary of it. So
that's awesome.
So anyway, so see all of these things just coming full circle. It only took like 12 years, 13 years, but it all worked out.
Well, you know what I always say, make mine Murdo.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Zach, give your social media and what have you out there to everybody.
Sure. The kids can find me on the social media at my name, ZackKruse, at Zack Kruse. That's where I am. And and then I also do a show with my buddies Ben Teed and comics writer Will Pfeiffer. We do a podcast called Pictures Within Pictures. We try to release 1, maybe 2 episodes a month. It's really loose. It's not. We're never going to hit 1,775 or whatever episodes. But it comes out once a month. It's Pictures Within Pictures. It's available everywhere, just like other podcasts. So I hope people listen.
Awesome. Wow. Yep. Well, absolutely a pleasure, my friend. Good to catch up with you for the first time in a couple of years, and
you're here.
Like I said, looking forward to the book.
Me too.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, that was awesome.
It was great to talk to you guys and interact. It's been a while, as you say.
Definitely. All right, man. Take care. Have a good rest of your night.
All right. See you guys.
Take care.
Take care now.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Man, oh man, was that amazing.
It sure was.
Can't help but admire the man's scholarly zeal for his subject.
Yep. Yes, indeed. In fact, so scholarly that he even has a degree for it.
That's right.
I wish I had the panache and the time to do that myself, honestly, because that's dedication to the craft right there.
Yeah.
Ian, never underestimate your sense of panache.
That's true. That's true. I also like a good ganache, but that's.
Oh my God! See, we went back to the Borscht Belt. Incredible.
I always bring it back, my friend. I always bring it back. Oh man, but yeah, like we said on the episode, we'll definitely be bringing this up on a future previews episode. As I believe Zach said, it's going to be in the December previews.
December,
Yeah, at least December, maybe November, but at least December.
Yep. Yeah, and anyone who does not want to wait for that, you can actually save $9 on the paperback pre-order right now at the University Press of Mississippi's website. They have it available for only $21 right now, and expected ship date is February of 2021. It is available on Amazon as well. No discount as of yet, but chances are as we get closer to the date, there might very well be one. But if you want to get it straight from the source, save yourself a little bucks. Good times all around.
Yes, indeed.
All right. Anything else we want to bring up, folks, or are we good to wrap this baby up?
I think we're good to wrap it up, honey.
Yeah, I think we're good.
All right. Awesome. Shane, take it away.
I'm ready.
Okay.
Visit us at comicgeekspeak.com to send us an email. The address is comicgeekspeak@gmail.com. To leave a voicemail, the number is 267-702-6642. Stop by thecomicforums.vanillacommunity.com and let us know what you think of everything Steve Ditko that Zach brought up, and looking forward to his book. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook. Thanks to everyone who contributes to the episodes. We truly appreciate it and could not do it without you. And as always, we are uniting the world's mightiest heroes, one listener at a time.
You got it on Wednesday, and you was psyched about it, going to the volume up. These guys will talk about it, everything that geeks love. From cakes to laser beams, opinions like the seasons on everything you read in comics, movies, games, toys, artists, comic geek speak, comic geek speak, comic geek speak, comic geek speak, comic geek. Uniting the world's mightiest heroes. This is Comic Geek Speak.
And print it.